So I had the opportunity to work with a PR agency recently, and they brought me this really interesting use case that I wanted to share with you. Essentially, they wanted 3 separate workflows that would help with the overall efficiency, scaling, and lead generation of the agency. And this is something that likely would have taken at least one person's sort of full-time job to do before. Now, with this automation in place, that person will be able to focus on kind of more high-level strategic projects. So I thought I'd show you each flow at a high level, kind of go over what each piece of the flow is doing in N8N and kind of how you might conceptually think about building something like this in N8N or a similar platform. If you really want to dive in and learn what each node is doing step by step, I will be sharing the template at some point in my community, and you'll be able to download it and kind of dive a little bit deeper into it. But I thought for this video, we could just go over how this flow is built at a high level, and hopefully it can help you sort of think strategically about projects like this or how it might kind of apply to your use case. So with that, let's dive in and I'll kind of give you a demo of each flow. Okay, so here I am in N8N, and basically I'll go through kind of what each flow's function is, how they work. I'll actually demonstrate kind of what they're doing, and then we can kind of walk through how each flow was constructed step by step. So this first flow I called journalist output by topic, and essentially the use case here is that somebody from the agency could go into Telegram and just punch in a keyword into a specific Telegram channel, and then that would trigger this flow to run, and it would source kind of all journalists who cover that topic for various news outlets, and it would give you kind of the freshest possible results so that you could quickly source a handful of journalists to reach out to about a specific topic. So if I pull up Telegram here, you can see we have a channel called Journalist Search. And what I'm going to do is actually punch in a keyword. So I'll try the one I was just working on, which is AI tokens. So now that I've punched that in, that should have triggered the workflow to start. In N8N, you can't actually see it running unless you're doing test workflow. So since we have our workflow running, we'll just have to kind of wait and see if it ends up generating some results. Great, so now you can see we've got some results here. What we essentially have here is a journalist sourcing report for a variety of different journalists. So the name, the publication, it tries to scrape the email, does not succeed every time, tries to get the LinkedIn handle and Twitter, and then their specialization in terms of, not only this topic, but what other topics does their beat typically include, and a handful of their recent articles with the links. So you can see we've got, I think in this case, 7 results for this particular keyword, AI tokens. So how does this thing work? Essentially, it starts off with a Telegram trigger node. These are pretty easy to set up in N8N. They have a native integration with Telegram. And we essentially just have to grab the chat ID and connect to the Telegram account to get that thing up and running. From there, I basically use an if node to make sure that we have the right chat ID. So that's how we confirm that this message is coming from the chat that we want to trigger these journalist searches. And then we have a code node to normalize keyword. And essentially, I'm a non-technical builder, so I don't know how to code. I don't know how to write JavaScript, but thanks to AI and LLMs, we can still create these types of simple code nodes in N8N to do a variety of different functions. And in N8N, it's kind of the best way to just quickly and cheaply get to the result you want. So in this case, I needed to normalize a keyword to get to a specific search format to build my Google search queries for my Google News searches. And you can do that in your LLM of choice. I use ChatGPT on the Pro tier, and basically I have this thing open. Usually use the desktop app and just have it open as like a co-pilot whenever I'm building anything, and you just ask it for what you need. So basically, if I was to say create an N8N code node that normalizes keywords for Serper search. And I won't do this every time, but just for the folks who are new to N8N and unfamiliar with coding using LLMs, just want to demonstrate like how I'm doing this throughout my N8N projects or any platform like Relevance AI. You can use this workflow. So it's created this N8N code script for me. It's JavaScript is like the native language of N8N, and then I just plug that into my code node. And then it's just a matter of testing. So unfortunately, with more complex use cases, there can be a lot of back and forth between your LLM and your code node to get the right result. But I mean, it is possible to get these results, and it can be extremely powerful. So once that's constructed, I have this running into a variety of Serper searches, and I'm using serper.dev here, which is a very cheap Google search endpoint, and you can do any type of Google search. In this case, I'm using a Google News search. So you construct your Google News search using an HTTP node in N8N, and these are just generic HTTP requests that you can make to any API. In this case, we have a credential for Google Serper .dev, so we're able to use that to authenticate and do an API call. And then you can just construct any query you want for Serper.dev. And in this case, I've got a couple searches tailored for recency. So I've got like last 24 hours, last 2 days, last week. And the reason I did it like that is because you can only get limited results per search. So to get a lot of results, I wanted to get these different time windows so that I could get 10 results from each node. And then I had a few that are more focused on outlets. So I have some trusted outlets that I know, I want to be tracking these journalists from, say, the New York Times or Fortune. And I have 3 different searches because it's limited in terms of how much filtering you can do for these Serper searches. So I've got The Verge, NY Times, and Fortune on this one. And then on the next one, I've got some more outlets that are trusted. So between that, all these different nodes, I'm getting 60 plus results for different articles written about this specific keyword. So from there, what I've done is merge this all together into one appended result. And then I'm able to massage it a little bit so that it's ready for scraping. And what I have here is a scraping loop. So between all 60 articles or however many results I've gotten, now I have this really nice formatted result that gives each URL to each article. And that's what the result I'm getting from the API, which is a great API. And then I can loop over those one by one in this scraping logic. And I'm using Scrapfly, which is a extremely powerful, versatile, easy to use web scraping engine. I think we're on the $30 per month tier. It's not terribly expensive for 200,000 scrapes per month. And depending on the sophistication of the scrape, it can cost more credits. So I'm trying to keep this extremely cost effective. So I'm using 1 credit scrapes, which are not doing any JS rendering or any like really complex scraping techniques. It's just doing like a simple web scrape, and that's good enough for 50+% of the use cases. So 50%, give or take, we're actually getting some result from the scrape. And then what I'm doing is cutting down that HTML result so that it's ready for an LLM. So again, in the interest of staying cost effective here, I'm using the cheapest OpenAI model, which is 3.5 Turbo. Really powerful, really strong, but it has a limited context window. So it can't just take the entire HTML from a website and scrape it for the author. It needs a shortened result. So that's what this code node is doing. And then the HTML or the LLM is basically combing through and trying to find the author of each of these articles. From there, my code node is just structuring that result and making it clean and ready. And then we're just baking it down from, let's say we did 60 searches, but we only got 10 or 20 journalists out of that. That's being all consolidated with code here. And we're removing any of the empty results. We're deduplicating. and then we move into our next loop. So the next loop is basically doing another Serper search for each of those journalists that we scraped and trying to find their beat specialization. So not, we found one article that they covered, but what do they generally cover in their beat? So this is going to pull a list of keywords, and the LLM is going to synthesize that result. So you can see you're an expert at analyzing journalist article history, developing a beat specialization. So it's going to give you some keywords, and we're going to make sure that it's narrow in terms of the types of keywords it's assigning, because we're not interested in every topic under the sun. We just want a specific range of topics. And basically, it's going to give you a few URLs to show you that this is the type of article this journalist typically covers, and here's a few examples. So really from there, all we're doing is just one more Apollo API call to enrich that journalist record that we found and find whatever information we can, whether it's email, LinkedIn, etc. And all of that is getting then compressed into a Telegram message, where you can see I've already laid out the template here for a Telegram message, and then I'm providing each input with a variable so that the flow runs per journalist, and it's going to pull different pieces of information from that flow to then push it into Telegram. And that's how we get our end result, which is going to be this list of different journalists and their beat specialization, their recent articles, so that the team, the PR agency, can then sift through these and see if any of these are a particularly good fit to reach out to regarding this specific topic that they're interested in. Alrighty, from there, I'm going to jump into the next flow. So the next flow is, it's basically, the use case is creating an enriched database of journalists who cover all the topics that this PR agency specializes in. So basically, they want a database of all these different journalists they can reach out to for different topics and articles, and they want it consistently up to date with the freshest knowledge and the freshest information. So this one actually ended up being a little overly complex, and I think that's just a constraint of N8N, is like when you have tons of loops running, N8N can get confused. So sometimes it makes sense to break things up into multiple flows, and that's what I've done here. So the first one is this journalist main flow, and this one's extremely simple. And what it's doing is it's triggering every day, every 24 hours. It's pulling a list of keywords that we're interested in tracking. And that's getting pulled from this spreadsheet here called article monitoring. And basically, we have this list of keywords, kind of like our source of truth of all these different keywords that this agency is interested in tracking. And it's going to pull those and essentially just loop them over. And so each keyword that it loops over, it's going to execute, it's going to send to this other sub workflow. And that keyword's the only input that's going into the workflow. And this is actually pretty similar to our journalist search workflow, but it's a little more complex because we want more results from this. We want to build like a really robust database. So you can see here is the first node, and it's when executed by another workflow. So these two workflows are linked, and that's a great way to structure complex workflows in N8N, is to just use this node. And so this is a sub workflow. You don't even have to activate it. It's just going to get triggered whenever an input comes from that other workflow. So a keyword's going to come in here. We already went over that normalization step that's going to happen to get that keyword ready to plug into these Serper searches. So it's going to be the exact same thing, these serper.dev searches. And we've got a variety of different time frames that we're searching. We don't really need to go over 24 hours because this workflow is running every 24 hours. So the results are going to get merged here, and then there's some code running to get them ready for scraping. And we have a very similar scraping loop here where we're using Scrapfly to pull in each article and try to scrape it using a variety of methods. The difference here is I've gone a little further than just running that super, economical scrape that's not using any of the bells and whistles of Scrapfly. I have an if node telling us that if we get a null result, so if we get an error and the scrape does not run successfully, it's actually going to send it down this other flow that's going to use more sophisticated scraping methods, such as render.js and other methods to really do our best to actually get a result from these. And the reason I did that is because There's some news outlets like Reuters that always have more sophisticated bot blocking measures taken on their websites that are going to prevent us from doing simple scrapes. So in order to try to get some of those results, I have this subflow going that gets triggered whenever we get an error. And then we have that same LLM chain that's trying to comb through the HTML and find the actual author of the article. And then if that doesn't work, we have an even more sophisticated LLM prompt that's using a more sophisticated OpenAI model, GPT-4, to try again to get the result that we need. So this one's just taking some fallback measures to try to get as many results as we possibly can. And then it's going to do exactly what the last flow did, which is send it into this next flow, which is doing the exact same thing we did before. So we're using another Serper request to get the beat specialization. We're using an LLM to comb through the resulting articles and really determine what are some of the beat specialization keywords that we want to assign to this journalist, as well as some recent articles that we want to include that would be relevant. With this flow, I'm getting a lot of bad results that are kind of corrupting my flow and triggering things like the Apollo API, which cost money to run. So I don't want a lot of bad results triggering that API and getting null results. So what I did is created a switch node here. And this is a really useful node for getting garbage out of your workflows. And I tried this with a lot of different other nodes, like the if node and the filter node, and it was continuously stopping my workflow, and it wasn't achieving this result of not letting anything touch the Apollo API that wasn't necessary. So the switch node was the only one that actually ended up working. So I highly recommend trying that if you're stuck. And that's just getting everything back here into this merge node and back into my loop. But it achieves the result I need of not hitting the Apollo API unnecessarily. So from there, if the Apollo API gets the contact information that we need, it's going to send it right into my Google Sheet. And I'll show you that Google Sheet in a second of the actual journalists that we're enriching. But then we have this subpath. So if the Apollo API is unsuccessful in finding that person's contact information, we have a series of Google searches here that are just trying to find that information on the public internet. And ultimately, after we've tried to enrich each contact, we want to just add it to our Google Sheet with all the information that we've gathered throughout this process, so that we can continue to develop this robust record of all these journalists covering the topics that we're interested in. And the end result here is, if I toggle over to my journalist tab, a list of various journalists that are specialized in these topics. So this has been running for a few days now. We've developed a database of 130 journalists, and it's just going to keep growing and refreshing. The final piece of this flow is my deduplication logic, which is a little clunky, but I really couldn't figure out another way to do it. If you look at my original journalist flow, after this loop has run over every single keyword that we're tracking, then it's going to hit this HTTP requests, which triggers this dedupe flow, which literally all it's doing is pulling out all that information from my journalist sheet, running deduplication logic on it, clearing the sheet, and then re-inputting everything. And you have to be really gentle with this Google Sheets API. I think it's because this agency is not on a paid plan, but essentially it just needs space between. Otherwise, it's going to throw an error that you're hitting the API too often, and that can then disrupt your flow, and you can lose a lot of your data that way. So there's all these little quirks that you have to do in and with these different APIs, but after some massaging, I think we have something that's really robust and works really well, and also can just be updated dynamically as the agency wants to track new keywords. They can just add it to this Google Sheet, and the flow will update intelligently. So last but not least, we have our media monitoring flow, and I think this one is potentially the most powerful because it's what it's doing is essentially monitoring the internet in real time looking for news stories in these different topics that are being tracked and trying to find who's covered the story. It's updating every 30 minutes, so it's closer to real time. And it's looking at breaking news stories. It's determining if they're big news, and then it's finding who's covered it so far, which journalists, which news outlets, and then it's going back to that database that we're building to see, okay, who are some journalists who normally cover this beat, who have not yet covered this story, and creating a list of those journalists who might be ideal for a PR agency to reach out to. It's also crafting the pitch for them. So it's looking at some of their past articles and saying, hey, saw your work, writing for this article. Would love to talk to you about covering this news story that is within your beat specialization, which you have not yet covered. So if we look at Telegram, we can actually find the specific, we can find the channel. So this is a channel that's not being interacted with, but is essentially where all these alerts are funneling to. So the final node in this workflow is a Telegram node. This agency is really heavily on Telegram. So basically what it's doing is it's running every 30 minutes, and then it's outputting a report for any new given breaking story. So it's breaking news story. It's big news. We found these are the top 5 journalists we think would be ideal to reach out to cover this topic based on their beat specialization. So you can see the output here is story to pitch, the headline or topic, general topic. In this case, Google appoints chief AI architect. This category is AI. The topic's AI business models. Example article. This is just one of many articles that have been written about this topic. It's been mentioned on Twitter at least 20 times. Trusted news outlets, at least 2 have covered it. And here are some journalists from our database we think it would be ideal to reach out to and pitch the story to. And then it's kind of giving you some background on each of these journalists, one of their recent articles, and then an actual pitch. So, hey, Parmi, I noticed your recent insightful pieces on AI business models and the security aspects of AI and technologies. With Google appointing a new chief AI architect, I believe you'll find the implications for the industry fascinating for your coverage. Pretty generic pitch, but obviously that could be tweaked to kind of match the style and tone that we're looking for. So that's the output, and as you can see, it's been running all day, so we got tons of these things. And we'll continue to tune this and iterate on it. Maybe they want like less traffic, but I think for now it's getting us some pretty great output. So let's look at the flow itself. As I mentioned, it starts with a trigger node, which is scheduling to run every 30 minutes. And then basically it's doing a few things here. So for this one, we want to make sure we're not like missing top of mind, vital news coverage. We don't want to miss breaking stories. This is a PR agency, and like speed is of the essence. So we've got 2 prongs here. One is going to be a standard Serper search like we've been doing. It's a Google News search, so it's going to pull those topics, and it's going to loop over them to sort of scan the internet for any articles about these topics. So that's pretty familiar. We've been doing that same flow in all of our workflows. But then I also have a list of RSS feeds in the Google Sheet here. And this is just some of the ones that I thought are the most relevant to these topic categories, but we could add more at any point. Again, this is just a Google Sheet. You can update it at any time. And it's going to pull those RSS feeds and scrape them. And with this one, we're actually able to do just like a generic API call and just go to these pages and scrape them, which is a rare luxury. It doesn't require any sophisticated scraping logic. We just grab the RSS feeds, and then we clean up the XML in this XML to JSON node. We normalize that, and then we filter it down for only articles within the last 30 minutes. So we only want those most recent articles. And that's going to be the output of that prong. It's going to be the same here. You're going to get a single array of all these different articles that it's found. The Serper call we have a limited time range. So we're, I think, looking at just the past 24 hours in this case. And then this filter is going to filter it down to the last 30 minutes. So again, 2 prongs, just grabbing the most recent news in these different topic categories, filtering it down to the last 30 minutes, and then it's merging it together. And then I've created a relevance filter. So what this code is doing is essentially just going and looking at the original keyword and making sure these articles are at least somewhat relevant to that keyword, because we can get a lot of noise from these RSS feeds. So it's just another filtering step to just try to make sure we're targeting for relevance here. From there, we have another loop. So again, as I mentioned, there's loops within loops in N8N, and this one is no exception. I think what's worked really well in this particular workflow is like having loops that then end, and then you're just getting the output from the done side of the node. So it's basically like loop, end, and then to the next loop, and then done. And that's actually worked really well to be a little more sequential in N8N versus like loops within loops, which can sometimes confuse the system. So if I look at this LLM chain, basically what this is doing is it's trying to look at a list of articles and assign these topic tags to the articles so that we essentially we have a story that encompasses many articles. So we're looking for breaking news stories. We're not looking just for specific articles. So basically it's going to be given an article title and summary, and then it's going to assign a topic tag from the list below. And we're going to make sure that these are like relevant topic tags, that we're not just assigning like random words to this. And that's going to be pulled from our list of topics. So it's like pull from that list and assign a topic tag, or just leave it blank. Don't give us just a bunch of noise. And it's going to assign a category and then a story ID, which is kind of the most important part, because again, we want to be able to like work with a story and pitch stories to the downstream journalists. We don't want just to like pitch a specific article and say, hey, there was one article about this. No, we're looking for like breaking news stories. So that's what this LLM step is really helping us to do. And it's just going to loop over all these different articles and sort of create these stories around it. This is where it kind of gets interesting. So we're just normalizing that output, and then we're pulling it into another loop. And in this loop, we're essentially trying to determine, like, is this a big news story? So we'll take like a story ID, which is kind of like generally encompass and describe that story. It's not going to just be a specific like article title. And then we're going to actually run it through 2 Serper searches. So the first one is going to be like, how is this appearing on Twitter? And the Twitter API is very cumbersome and very expensive, so we're not using that. We're just using Google again, and we're searching for specifically the site x.com. And we can only get 20 results from this. So this is just going to determine like, is there activity in Twitter chatter around this topic? If there's like 20 results and they're all about this, then we're going to say yes, it's getting some traction on Twitter. The next is going to be who's writing about this. So it's just going to be another news search about that story ID, and it's going to determine how many articles have been written about it, and how many of those articles are from trusted sources. And then we've built logic into this code node to say, okay, based on our criteria, is this big news or is it not big news? And then we have a filter to say, okay, if it's not big news, if this is not a breaking big story, then we don't care about it. We're going to filter it out. And if it is, then it can continue along on our path. So on to the next part of our chain here. So this is where we're going into our scraping logic, and we're trying to find like who has covered this so far, which journalists have covered this. So the first step here is the Scrapfly API call, and that's very familiar with these other flows. We're just scraping through these articles, and we're scraping through them in this case, one big array. We're just going to scrape all of them, and then this code and LLM chain are just trimming down that HTML again and analyzing the results to see, okay, which journalists' names appear in these results. We're going to clean that up and eventually merge it with that original array. So the first output array is like, this is the breaking story, here's all the articles written about it, and then is it big news or not? And the merge is going to say, okay, all of that information, plus here's who's written about it so far, the different journalists, the different news outlets who've covered it. And that took some time. That's a complicated bit of logic. But what did help is, in N8N, something that took me a while to learn is if you want to create like a merge node and get a bunch of information from different nodes into one array, the best way to do that is by merging the actual nodes into each other. I didn't know that. I thought that you could reference nodes from like way upstream in a code node and it would work fine. It works much better. I think it is possible to do that, but it works much better if you just literally plug all the nodes you need into that node. So you can see I have this loop over items, which is the last place I had that complete array, and then my cleanup node with all the journalist names, all of that's getting merged into this. And that's how I'm able to actually achieve the result that I need, which is a huge array of all this information. And then the last piece here is, this is just the final piece. And basically what I have here is, this is my Google Sheet referencing all my journalists. So that journalist database that we were building in a previous flow, that's getting pulled here. And I don't want it to corrupt my logic here. Sometimes if you put like a bunch of Google Sheets nodes in a row, it can like confuse downstream nodes into like pulling from the wrong Google Sheet. So the solution I came to for that is just, let's have a separate path that goes into that Google Sheets node, and then it merges with the flow right at the very end. So it's not confusing anything upstream. So that's why N8N workflows tend to look so crazy and chaotic, is because this is kind of like the workarounds you have to do to not corrupt your workflows. So it's going into this merge node, and then what's happening here is essentially you've got that array that I showed you, that I talked about with the different journalists and the articles and the story ID on top, and then you've got my whole database of journalists that I've already collected on the bottom. And it actually does matter what order you put these in. So the smaller result is easier to parse through, so we put that on top, and then the huge database is going on input 2. And all of that's getting processed with code to find, okay, based on beat specialization, here are the journalists who have not covered this story yet, who might be good candidates to cover it. And so that's what the output of this code is. And then basically you're merging everything together from prior stages, doing a little bit of preparation to shorten it within the context window so that we can keep using these cheap OpenAI models. And then this last LLM chain is basically compiling all of this into a report. So it's saying, here's the story in question. Here's a few articles that have been written about it. And then here's the journalists we'd recommend pitching who have not yet covered this story. And here's an actual written pitch. And then that's getting sent straight to Telegram. And I didn't know this before, but LLMs can actually create well-formatted messages specifically for these different platforms like Telegram. And it kind of looks crazy on the output of the LLM, but then it looks actually quite good in the actual news alert. So you can see this is the final news alert. It puts in all the emojis and everything folks are used to seeing in Telegram, and then it's got everything really well formatted here with all the information that we need to start crafting our pitches to these different journalists. So that's pretty much the end of that flow, and pretty much the end of this video. As you can see, between these three workflows, we've got an engine that can really power this agency, and the use case could really apply to any sort of business, but in this case it's a PR agency. All their day-to-day operations, all their outreach, lead gen, it's being distilled into a very intelligent automated workflow that's just going to continue running now that it's built, and hopefully save them a ton of time and effort. So hope this was helpful. Hope this kind of sparks some ideas as to how you might be able to build something like this, or if you're building on behalf of clients, how you can strategize a really complex workflow like this from scratch. So yeah, again, hope this was helpful, and I will see you next time.